original experiences that humanity has as being bodily creatures. And of course, we talk about original solitude, the uniqueness of humanity in correlation to other creatures, especially that openness to one, that original unity. Although we may be alone in this creation, we are not meant to be alone. We are called to be united, to be drawn towards the other. And then that original makings, that ability to behold and see the image of God in the other, especially to behold that in them being the full creature that they are, both body and soul. Yet, it becomes extremely difficult after the origin for humanity to be able to do all these things. Why? That major problem we looked at before. Sin. The inclination to sin. What is sin?
Straining of your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm. Straining of your relationship with God. Yeah. Others? Thoughts and definitions, ideas? Yeah, it is. Sin is that which goes against the created order, against the plan for life, the universe, for everything. We ought to recall that human beings have the capacity of freedom to be able to act freely. What this means is that we do not, and at least the important thing is, we do not act automatically. We don't necessarily go with a pre-programmed sort of plan or idea or purpose. This, in fact, is said to be a part of that original solitude, that experience, that ability to be free, to act freely. Remember, not the freedom just to do whatever we want. We talked about two types of freedom: freedom of indifference, the freedom of excellence. The freedom that we are given is that so that we may freely, of our own volition, of our own will, pursue that which we want to pursue. That is ultimately God. But to do it in a way that we give it of our own volition, our desires, our wants, our actions. But when freedom is abused, that is where sin enters into all of it. How is it that sin disrupts all of these things? First and foremost, sin causes a disruption between man and God. There's meant to be a relationship here, but sin cuts that off. We talked about that a little bit before when we kind of dove into more deeply the problem of sin. Why? If God is the good God, sin is going against what the good God wants to desires, and even commands of us, being lesser beings, even in our freedom, still lesser beings than God. So sin harms, disrupts, even destroys that relationship between man and God. But this not only works in that metaphysical level, as it were, but even in an internal, a deeper level. Sin disrupts the relationship within humanity, between the body and the soul. These are, as it were, kind of our two most basic parts. The physical body, right? The spiritual soul. It is in some way linked to it. They are meant to exist in harmony, in unity. They are meant to work together. But one of the major effects of sin is that it disrupts, not necessarily destroys, but it disrupts greatly, severely, the relationship of body and soul. That they cannot work together. And so it becomes an internal struggle to even be able to do, to be, we are called to do, to be. And at times we'll prioritize one part of ourselves over the other. Especially post-fall world, more often than not, the body is elevated. Yes, there are times the soul is elevated to the degradation of the body. But many times it is the body that is elevated as the more important or the better part. Instead of meant to be cooperating and working together. In writing or reflecting on those sorts of things, we see in the scriptures how it is sin can affect us bodily creatures. When we see that from the first letter of John, where the apostle writes, talking about these three sorts of things that affect our ability to know and love God. The first he says is the concupiscence of flesh. The concupiscence of flesh. What he means by that is that talking about this divide within the human person, the flesh, the body, desires more to be pleased, is more inclined to sin. Why? Because it is through the body that we experience everything. All the senses come because of the body, right? We unfortunately do not gain knowledge just through osmosis, hooking our minds up to the cloud. whether the internet cloud or something else. As great as that might be. So the body, being that source of experience and source of encounter with the world outside of us, that we elevate the experience of the body. So we're more concerned with pleasing the body. Rather than the two working together. The second one, he says, concupiscence of the eyes. Perhaps the most influential experience that we have, bodily experience we have, is sight. We see things. I would argue most people probably, if they had to choose between the two major senses, sight or sound, would probably prefer to keep sight. We very much encounter things more through sight than perhaps even sound. To behold completely in that image the other thing or person or being or existence. Not that we can't do that through the other senses. We certainly can. But what is most memorable, what is most sort of striking to us, is to see them. Usually the first sense that is involved. We see them. Then perhaps we hear them. Then perhaps we may have the other senses. Smell or touch. So the concupiscence of the eyes, we become again over concerned with what we see and behold. We become so focused on the images that are in front of us that we don't reorient them back to the original. We talked about that last time. The image of God. What's the point of an image? It harkens us back to some original. In the sense of origin or in the sense of the beginning. We as human persons, as human beings, in beholding other human beings, are meant to see in them the image of God. But when we make it very sensual, it does not become about seeing them as what they are, as what they are created to be, but seeing them as how I want them to be. So the concupiscence of the flesh, concupiscence of the eyes. The last he says, pride of life. with the entry of sin, with this disruption in the human person, let alone in the communion of humanity with God, that we begin to raise these things as being the most important. That we puff up our pride. So in a way, we kind of rewire it. Not for the service of beholding and seeing God and the other, but of reorienting everything towards myself. I am the ultimate reference. Remember that Descartesian phrase, I think, therefore I am. It does not start with the other that is different and unique to me and outside of me. It starts within me. And everything revolves or concerns me. So how is it though sin enters into the world? How is it all of that happens? We were created with these original experiences. How do we fall from them? What is revealed to us in Genesis 3 highlights how it happens. So first, what we encounter is humanity existing at peace with itself, with the other, with God. Having these original experiences. Man and the woman, the text tells us. They are given one command. Eat of anything in the garden except this particular tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is what it's called. There comes one day into the garden a serpent. Serpent who speaks first to the woman and tempts her. What are you doing? What were you told to do? Oh, we were told that you know this or not eating this tree. Of course, God gave them a warning. If you eat of that tree, God told them. The literal translation is you will die the death. Which seems kind of odd. Why wouldn't it be phrased that way? But what is being said is that it's the emphasis on death. You will die. You will have that separation of body and soul. The basic definition of death, right? So, the woman says that as part of that, yeah. Would you eat of what we want? You know, but if we eat of this tree, we die. The serpent twists those words. The serpent twists those words. You won't die. You'll become like God. You'll become God's yourself, like God. That's not what he wants for you. So twisting the command of God, the command of the Father, into words of tyranny. And say, oh, he is suppressing you. He's not allowing you to be what you're supposed to be. The ultimate lie that he founds it all on is to say that only we can decide good and evil for ourselves. That's been sort of the pride of life. I know better. I experience things better, higher, greater than God. So it is then. The woman beholds the fruit. He's never quite defined what the fruit is. The apple is a later tradition, perhaps. It appears very good. Concupiscence in the eyes. It looks appealing. She seems hungry herself. Concupiscence of the flesh. So diving into all of these types of sin right there. She then takes a vow. Takes some, gives it to the man. The man partakes of it as well. The consequences of this action, the consequences of all of this are immense. First one, we already kind of talked about original nakedness. Shame. Shame enters into the human conscience. Why shame? Because we have lost our original nakedness. We do not behold the other in a holy, in a God-fearing manner. Instead, hold them as something other. Or something only for our pleasure. And we know instinctively, we are not meant to do that. And so it is, we blush with shame at that. Continuing in the story, so they are ashamed of their nakedness, and they hide themselves when God seems to come among them in the afternoon. God calling out, where are you? Why are you not out? And the reply is, we're ashamed. We're ashamed. Because we're naked. God goes, well, how do you even know that? How do you even know that you're naked? How do you even know shame? Because you've taken part of the fruit. What happens? The blame game. The man says, well, it's the woman's fault. Woman, you gave me. Actually, he blames. The man blames woman you gave me to eat of it. The woman goes, well, that serpent did it. So no one taking responsibility for their own actions. Avoidance of responsibility. Everything else becomes suspicious. There's a suspicion of the world, of the other. So the loss of that solitude. Because we were called to be open to respect and wonder. Now, we become suspicious, we become afraid. So it is we find in everything else the source of our problems. We also see in there, in that suspicion, a loss of that unity as it was meant to be. Why? Because they start blaming each other. These two who are meant to become one now utterly become two. One against one. So instead of joining together to become one, they become uniquely one, in opposition to the other. It's his fault. No, it's her fault. But in fact, it's both of their faults. Everybody always wants to try to blame one gender or the other. It's both. So don't hold your heads up. We've all failed. Male and female, we've all failed. And shame and suspicion, and as I said before, sort of separation, as it were. Separation from God, separation within even ourselves. We're no longer comfortable even in our own bodies. We're no longer comfortable even in our own bodies. Hence begins hence emerges the idea of the body as prison. Instead of a home, instead of a place to dwell, it's a prison. It holds us back. The rest, as they say, is history. God expels a man and a woman, punishing them. Not only that expulsion, but diving into the struggles of the world. Women, the struggle of childbirth, the pain of labor. For man, another pain of labor, the struggle to work, the struggle to be able to feed himself, to get what he needs from the earth. Because yes, there's even a separation in that sort of level. Humanity from creation, from the cosmos. It is no longer a place of wonder and respect. It was something to be tamed or something to be manipulated for our own benefit. The world is no longer a gift that is given to us. It is other. It is separate. And I need to impose my dominance. This rift of sin, this disruption of sin, affects human beings down to the heart, or most fundamental level. It is because of sin that it is so difficult to love. It's because of sin that it is so difficult for us to love. And this comes out again in a very sort of classical way. We've talked before about that epic poem, Paradise Lost, by John Milton. Within that poem, within that work, obviously its subject being how it is humanity lost that which they had originally gained and received. Now, of course, that is also done within the context of eternal paradise, in the sense of the demons losing eternity and being condemned, and trying to do the same to humanity on earth. And Milton has in there a way of showing that in a poetic, yet still striking way, the encounter of man and woman in the conjugal act. We talked before about that pre-fall encounter that Milton draws up. A sight that is so beautiful and striking to behold that it even seems to strike at the core of Lucifer, Satan. Almost turning him back from his rebellion against God. Almost, but not. An act of such great giving and love. But in that Paradise Lost, he has man and woman encounter the other again after the fall. Again, showing it poetically but strikingly about how it is they seem to be forceful to the other, not open to the other, diverted, disrupted. Even that most basic reality, most universal reality of unity is disrupted, made hard, almost impossible, because of sin. The estrangement of the sexes begins to happen. Man against woman, woman against man. The other great way to reflect on is classic story of creation and fall. Frankenstein. How many have actually read Frankenstein? I don't mean just watch one of a multitude of versions of the movies, but actually read them. It's far more interesting to behold, and I think far more deeper message than any of the movies ever portray it to be. We know the basics of the story. It's always rehashed for us one way or the other. A scientist, mad with power, wishes to figure out how to be able to create life. Taking various parts from the dead, stitching them all together, and coming up with his formula, whichever it is. The movies always like to make it some sort of electricity. I can't remember what involves that. But the doctor is successful. He creates life. He brings this life into the world. And it's not the shambling, semi-conscious form that's made famous by Boris Karloff in the 1930s. Frankenstein, the monster, the creature that can barely communicate or can only communicate with words. No, it is one that is able to be, to act. But this creature, which remember, it's the doctor's name, not the creature's name. The creature in the novel is actually called Adam. Why is it that we call the first man Adam? It comes from the Hebrew that means man. It's a man, a male. It's not just a random name given. So the creature, Adam, struggles to understand its purpose. Because the doctor, while desiring to know how to be able to bring about life, didn't really have a reason for this creature existing. He was more concerned with the process of doing it than with the result and what came after it. So this poor creature struggling to understand and to act. It strives for a companion as well and forces Dr. Frankenstein to make a mate for him. Which he begins to do, but then repents of that and destroys the mate. Which of course enrages the creature. Adam. The novel sort of ends on a mysterious note of the two, creator and creature, struggling with each other. The wastelands of the Arctic. Many would see that as an image of our own struggle with this world. That we too are very often like the creature, unable to know and to understand what is our purpose, our goal. Unable to pursue, struggling to get the companion, help that we desire. And then the end, perhaps struggling ourselves with our Creator. If that is not the truth of our existence, it's not that Frankenstein moment. There was a plan, there was a purpose in all of this. From the beginning, it is our fault that it is all thrown off. In our abuse of freedom and our giving in to sin, committing sin, we hence become vulnerable. Vulnerable to those temptations. Remember, we talked about the three great temptations: world, flesh, devil. If either one, man or woman, had said no, it would not have happened. But both say yes. Both bring sin into the world, and it is propagated into humanity. It so affects everything that we are that it is transmitted to all of their succeeding children. First we go, well, why is it we all still sin? Shouldn't we be born in purity? No, we're not. We are all conceived after these original experiences. We are not created within them. We are created post-fall. That shame, that suspicion, that separation. We are tainted goods from the start. We are tainted goods from the start. This goes against the Renaissance, some of the Enlightenment ideas of humanity as a blank slate. Thinkers such as John Locke or Rousseau, who say that that it is society that imposes these sorts of things on us. How did society get them in the first place? No, blank slate is completely false. We are created in a state of corruption. It is that corruption which we struggle to overcome. Hence why we are concerned with morality, whether Christian or not. With the question of what is it I am to do? What is it that I need to pursue? If it was easy, we wouldn't need to ask that question. It is this loss sin that affects us so strong. So in order to overcome that and be restored to what we are supposed to be, what we were created to be, we need to overcome. And yet, every human effort to do so fails. It's only with the help of God, ultimately, that we can overcome all of this, begin to restore what we were supposed to be. See how that comes about in the next section. Comments, thoughts, questions? Clear as well. All right. So, reminder that this coming Friday is an institutional holiday, so we have no class on Friday. Monday is a personal holiday. I'm taking Monday off to rest from having it done in the upcoming next few days. We will not be having class until next Wednesday. You're welcome. So, read up on chapter 6 to begin to see, in chapter 6 in Call to Love, to see how it is we are able to overcome these things. How they are begin to be overcome in Christ. How is it that Jesus does all of this? To help us overcome this, to be able to be renewed and to live out those original experiences as best as possible. So read up on that, study up on that. I will see you all next